Bum, 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 bum. We are live. Dynasty Saturday Night 5, Dynasty Fantasy Football Podcast on the Going for Two Live Podcast Network. Please subscribe, rate, and review if you're listening to the audio feed. If you're watching here on the YouTubes and other video platforms, please make sure you do those other things that feed the algorithm monster what it must be fed. Like, comment, subscribe, notifications, all that jazz. No Josh Walker tonight. He is tending to some more important matters of in life, and that's okay, and that's fine, and we miss him and we love him, and he'll be back next week because we will be doing night one of Going for Two's draft coverage. We'll be on from 8:30 to 10. So we're doing the entire thing. We're starting a little before the draft starts, 8:00 on night one. We've got coverage night two. We've got coverage day three. So we've got you, I would say, covered with that coverage. So what are we going to do tonight with just me? We're going to cheat a little bit with the list of five. And the 5 things that I'm going to talk about are simply the positional and superflex tiers that I have right now for the 2024 rookie class. So we're going to do 5. Quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, and superflex overall. That's cheating. It's 5 things, so it fits. Before we get started, though, today's show is, of course, brought to you by Underdog. If you go to underdog.com or the Underdog app and put in the promo code GF2, you'll get up to $100 on your first deposit match if you're a new account. Underdog has it all. Best ball, DFS, private leagues, tournaments, big board and little board are wrapping up right now because we're trying to get those done before the actual NFL draft. If you're like me, you're getting pings, every other second, that it's time to, get a pick. I only do the slow drafts on Underdog myself. I know it's like, whatever, you're supposed to like do the fast ones because there's more value there. I don't have the patience to sit there and get through a draft. But anyway, get a lot of pings and it's like, hey, you have 10 minutes to pick. Hey, you have 30 minutes to pick. And it's like, shoot, But here we are. Yes. So anyway, Underdog has other major sports besides football, baseball, basketball, golf, racing, tennis, I think, all that. So yeah, please make sure you go to underdog.com and or the Underdog app. Use promo code GF2. Josh Norris himself will personally match up to $100 on your new account first deposit. Plunk down some money, start playing, and start winning? Question mark. I don't know, if you're in leagues with me, you'll probably be winning. So without further ado, I'm going to share screen here, and we're going to go through the rookie tiers that I have at each position and talk a little bit about sort of why I have them that way and how I'll be sort of applying these and using these after the NFL draft. And then, but before that, we'll get a little bit into sort of how I come up with these rankings. All right. And then click this, and we are good to go. So how do I come up with rankings for rookies? It's sort of a multi-factor process. I pull from pretty much any direction I can. Do I watch film? Yes. Do I listen to other people who watch film and have watched film for longer than I have? Yes. In fact, the other night I was actually sitting in with somebody when they were watching Jalen Polk film, and we were sort of talking about it together, and that was really cool. Yes, I dive into analytics. Do I have my own model? No. Do I consult people who do? Yes. Do I look at, a thresholding spreadsheet that's got, numbers plugged in from, everything from receiving yards per team pass attempt to PFF grades and things like that? Absolutely. And, I think importantly, too, I do some research. I'll take anything I can get. I know a lot of people like to shy away from hearing what other people think. I don't, I want to see some things I'm missing. I want to be challenged on my thoughts. So I will pretty much research and compile and aggregate anything I can on these rookies and put it all together into the rankings. I like to call my Uber rookie spreadsheet the Rookiepedia, right? It's got my stuff in there. It's got some stuff that other people have said in there. It's got some rankings in there and things. And so then I kind of pull it all together and come up with the rankings. And for me, really, each each prospect is a mosaic. It's kind of a cute way of saying like everything matters, right? Context, nuance. I take a holistic approach to this. So, for example, later on, I'll be talking about, say, two fifth-year breakout guys, right? What else is in that story that might counteract against the easy bet against, a fifth-year breakout guy? Not that we're chasing outliers because we think we're wiser and smarter at pulling that out, but certainly everything matters. It matters Ray Davis's personal story, right? Because the NFL is going to love that, and that might bump his draft capital up despite being 24 years old. And if it bumps his draft capital up, and the NFL likes that, and he's a dog, and they put him on the field, then we like that. We need that for fantasy football being on the field. So it's sort of a blend. The rankings, what you'll see is a blend of player evaluation, sort of expected draft capital, what we know now, which we're all about to be wrong about a lot soon, and thinking about the value that they are, the cost, the price. Who am I targeting? Who am I not? And then how does that translate both into the NFL and therefore into fantasy production for me and for you? So if you go to, say, a lot of, college people or Devi people, their rankings might be like purely scouting, like purely talent eval. This is how we rank them, and we can't know anything else until the NFL draft. And for me, it's a little different. It's a mix of a lot of things because I'm looking at this as a dynasty manager and as a person who's making dynasty content. And I don't like to call what we do dispensing advice. I just, I share ideas, right? I'm a fanalist. I'm a bozo with a microphone. I'm no different from any people watching or listening. So, and then of course it's important to note that because of sort of that, heterodox nature of what I'm coming up with in the rankings and how they spit out at the end, they're not exactly the order in which I draft them in, even now, even today, before the NFL draft. I'll get into a little bit about how that works when we go through each position and that sort of thing. All right. So let's rock and roll. The 2024 class at a glance. I think the quarterbacks have depth, but I don't know that it's depth that comes from having eliteness at the top. I think it's depth that comes from the bottom. In other words, the rise and fall and rise again of guys like Nix and Penix and Rattler and things like that are giving us, more viable options after, running backs, quarterbacks 3, 4, and 5 than really like there ever used to be, right? Certainly or at least there has been in a few years, right? Certainly the meteoric rise of JJ McCarthy has added to that mix as well. So it's lengthened the depth, right? It's not just depth because we might have 3, 4 like really awesome guys. It's we've got 8 or so guys who probably at one point are gonna get a start in the NFL. There's Kyle checking in the chat. Hi Kyle, good to see you. Kyle's going to roast me when we get to the running back rankings because of where I have Blake Watson. But speaking of running backs, I've been saying throughout this process, they're not underrated, they're overhated. There's a lot of running backs in this class who will have some sort of role. And I maintain that there are a lot of NFL teams who, because of all sorts of changes in the NFL and specialization and all that, will be using picks on running backs that they think will have some sort of notable role in their offense. It doesn't necessarily have to be a quote unquote lead back, a quote unquote bell cow, a quote unquote workhorse. It could be a short yardage goal line, a 2-minute drill guy, a pass catching guy, right? But there's jobs in the NFL to be had. I did an exercise a few weeks ago on Dynasty Fever where I kind of identified 10 to 15 teams who I think are going to be drafting for some sort of very useful role, whether it's toward the top of their depth chart, whether it's a passing back, whether it's much needed, type of next man up backup that we're going to like to grab in zero RB. So yeah, there's not a lot of high end, elite upside. There's no Bijan, there's no Gibbs and that sort of thing. But, of course, and I think they've been overhated for a little while. The wide receiver class is, of course, deep, as many are saying. But really, after the first three, it's kind of the Wild West as far as I'm concerned. And after you get out of the first, I don't know, maybe 10-ish, maybe not even, right? We've got a class that's deep with wide receiver twos and threes, both in the NFL and in our fantasy rosters. Uh, so yes, it looks like, oh gosh, there's like dozens of wide receivers that are fantasy viable. There's really only a few that are very plausibly high impact that we can be confident about. And as far as tight ends, yes, it is Bowers and everybody else. But I question how big the gap is. And even if my gap is too big, I think while there's truth to it's Bowers and everyone else, that narrative is driving down the price of quality alternative choices like Sanat, Sanders, for some people, Theo Johnson or Jaheim Bell, or, for me, I kind of like Jared Wiley in that mix as well. So, this idea that it's Bowers and everybody else, while true, is really negatively affecting the stock, if you will, of some other tight ends. And for us, that means, of course, value, right? So let's get in with a note on the tiers, right? So my tiers are a color, right? But within that, there might be like what I call soft tier breaks, guys that are worth prioritizing towards the top of that tier and guys that are worth prioritizing a little less towards the back of that tier. And so it's a combination of, yes, there's a tier and you take the cheapest one, but also if you can, there's an opportunity, I think, to target certain guys within those tiers that maybe matter a little more, higher ceiling, or have a wider path to success, that sort of thing. And I'll demonstrate that when I do these in a second. All right. So let's start with the quarterbacks. I am a firm believer that it is Caleb and everybody else. And it's not just because Caleb has a huge ceiling and, he's, the best quarterback prospect that we've had in years. For me, it's also, when can we, really recall a quarterback who's going to get really high NFL draft capital, who's going to a team that's that good a landing spot, that already has that good a team surrounding him, whether it's they're improving their offensive line. They had a solid defense, especially towards the end of last year. They're figuring things out there. Obviously added Keenan Allen. They added DJ Moore last year. They may still draft, another wide receiver or, some sort of offensive weapon. They've added DeAndre Swift. They've added Gerald Everett because Shane Waldron likes to run a lot of 12 and also even more so have like a multi-tight end hellscape that could cap the fantasy value of, a guy like Komet, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, it's about that, because we've always said that Caleb has a huge ceiling, but we're kind of worried about that floor, right? Well, I maintain that most of the worst things he did on tape were directly related to the USC team that had a poor offensive line and a poor defense. So it was basically, stuff that he had to do to adjust to, the pressure that he was constantly under, and, having to race to 50 points every game because your defense couldn't stop everybody. So he had to play a lot of hero ball. So the thesis here is that he's not going to have to do that nearly as much. And that's really a lot of the worst stuff he put on tape is related to that. So I feel pretty confident now about Caleb for sure. I have question marks pretty much about everybody else. These are pretty chalk rankings and tiers as far as the quarterbacks go, because quarterback is the closest thing we have to a crapshoot. It's the hardest position to figure out. There's so much that goes into it, whether it's what's between the ears or offensive line or scheme and coaching fit and that sort of thing. So I'm pretty much right now just saying, okay, this is what we think the NFL thinks. I'm sprinkling a little bit of what I think, and we'll adjust from there. So, for example, I like Michael Pratt better than I like Michael Penix. But all things considered, I don't think it's very plausible that, Pratt is going to be drafted at anywhere near to where Penix is at the moment. I hope I'm wrong, but that's the way it looks. So I'm going to say, okay, like I'll put Penix in that tier with Nix. In that tier with Nix and Penix, I might approach them differently if I had a rookie draft before the draft. So, for example, without knowing that where these guys are being drafted, let alone if they're getting first round draft capital, they can slide in mocks. You can often get a Penix or a Knicks, as late as mid to late second, depending on who you're mocking with. So I'd be much more willing to take a chance on them in a NFL draft, rookie draft, than where I think they're going to end up if they get the draft capital that people want. Which brings me to the argument about value retention. Absolutely, a first round NFL quarterback is a class of asset in Dynasty that retains value. So not only is it, they're valuable in the superflex in sort of this vague market sense, and also they're valuable in the superflex if they produce and you're starting two quarterbacks, et cetera. There's obviously value there. But just sort of just as a person, as an asset itself, as an asset class, and sort of a more micro level, they retain value, right? Like it took a while for guys like Fields, Lance to really drop down those startup ADP boards or drop down what they're worth in a trade. My concern with Knicks, but especially Penix, is by the time you get down to them, for me personally, value retention might be the only reason I'm picking them. I don't love the player. And when you add in the bust rate on first round quarterbacks, I ask folks this season, what are the limits of our argument about value retention, right? At what's the tipping point where it's value retention versus the fact that in 2024 we have so many very good non-quarterback options to turn to. So when you take into account the bust rate of even first round NFL quarterbacks, as you're going to see in my Superflex rankings, have kind of, I don't want to say devalued quarterbacks, but I certainly am thinking about things differently. Like I feel a lot more comfortable, almost no matter where anybody lands, with Harrison and Neighbors than I do with Drake May, Jane Daniels, JJ McCarthy. The other question I have for us as a community is the NFL learning when it comes to quarterback? I'm going to do a thread or an article about this, but here's my hypothesis, right? Changes in the NFL seem quick, but they really are slow to develop. We know that. That's not the hypothesis. The hypothesis is that the NFL is learning when it comes to quarterback. The NFL clearly has a quarterback evaluation and development problem. I think to argue against that is pretty silly. I think the development part of that problem is the even starker problem. But, right, in 2021, while I remain higher on Lance and Fields than most people. And I attribute a majority of what's happened to them to the organizations and a small minority to the players, right? I acknowledge that Lance was overdrafted and we should have known that he was a little bit more developmental than we were thinking. But the NFL also did let Fields slide. And we're learning that was probably the right thing to do, that while he can still, I think, be a very good starting quarterback in the NFL, he is not the, processor, and timing and anticipation passer that he needs to be in a lot of offenses. And so, they let him slide. So maybe they learned, right? Okay, you're skeptical. 2022, they showed restraint in general. Going into that NFL draft, I made, the prediction that no quarterback was going to be drafted until pick 20, and Malik Willis was not going to be a first rounder. Both those things turned out to be true. And also, you see, besides Kenny Pickett at 20, where the other guys were picked, they knew this was a bad quarterback class. So even though they've completely messed up quarterback, they've doubled and tripled down on everything they mess up on. And they've created this quarterback thirst by overinflating the positional value and going crazy for it because they're completely impatient with the quarterbacks and just run them through and say that, okay, we're done with that guy, on to the next, right? But there's signs they're learning, right? Exhibit C last year, 2023. I know a lot of this was like a Reddit thread and the sports books, but a lot of folks in both the NFL draft analysis industry and the fantasy space, were saying that Levis belonged up there with those other three quarterbacks. I thought that was a preposterous, ridiculous proposition. And guess what? He slid into the top second. Now, do you want to say that Tennessee tried to trade back into the late first to get that fifth-year option, and teams like the Chiefs, who were drafting a hometown boy when they were hosting the draft, weren't going to trade, and teams like the Eagles, who could take, what was that, Nolan Smith, another Georgia North acquisition, they weren't going to not do that, right? So you could even say that, you could even argue that Levis was a late first pick, in sort of de facto, right? But even then, he wasn't a top 4 or 5 pick like some people were saying, right? And now Exhibit D, right? Let's go back even further and talk about Jordan Love. He was definitely way overdrafted. People who know better had like a 3rd, 4th round rank on him. But what did the Packers do, right? They reached into the 1st round, got that 5th-year option, and sat him and gave him seasoning. And now, if you look at it, every single quarterback needy team, for the most part, has some form of insurance plan in place, except for the Bears, who are going to acquire the best prospect and have the best landing spot, and Denver, who is dysfunctional as all get out, right? But the Commanders have Mariota in place, right, to mentor and or be insurance or whatever. Or if they miss out on a quarterback because they trade back or whatever, then he's going to be there, right? Patriots, exactly the same thing with Jacoby Brissett. Minnesota, exactly the same thing with Sam Darnold. Las Vegas, exactly the same thing with Gardner Minshew. Those are the quarterback needy teams. Those are the teams that people are putting these quarterbacks with in their mock drafts and their mind's eye. And so, hypothesis, the NFL might be learning when it comes to quarterback. They might be learning that at least somebody needs seasoning. If not, they might even be learning that you don't maybe roll the dice and waste the draft capital, and maybe you build around first, or say, okay, we can pretty much only get a slightly above average quarterback, so let's build around that. So so what do I mean by slightly above average quarterback and that sort of thing? Think about this. In almost any industry, teachers, doctors, fantasy analysts, plumbers, right? If, in general, what maybe 10, 20% of that profession is like elite, right? So now think about NFL quarterbacks. We're already saying how can they not be able to find 32 people to do the job, right? What percentage of NFL quarterbacks are elite? So let's say 10, 15, 20, even if you're kind and say 20%, that's 6.4 quarterbacks who are elite, right? So it's a small club and you ain't in it. You might as well think differently about the way you build your team. And so I think they're definitely, I shouldn't say definitely, my hunch is they're learning on the seasoning part. I'm not so sure about the other part, TBD, but just a little thought experiment there. So let's go then with tier 6 to 10 at quarterback, just 9 through 26. I'm not really going to talk about much of these guys. I think really the only guys that have potential to be, an eventual NFL starter, even if it's a journeyman starter, is Jordan Travis and Austin Reed. There are some other guys who I think are looking at being, career backups. Like the ones listed there, Leary and Mordecai, Hartman and Plummer. Getting back to Pratt, I could totally see a world in which guys like, Rattler, Nix, Penix have burnt out of the league or have played themselves into bench spots. And, good old Michael Pratt, once he learns a little bit more about NFL defensive pressures and schemes and things like that, is consistently dynasty quarterback, whatever, like 26 to 34, like every year. So, keep your eye out on for Pratt too. John Reese Plumlee, the guys at the W Royale suggest that his best way to get on the field is like a Taysom Hill role, right? So, keep your eye out on that and who drafts him. Running backs, all right? So, as I said, they're, overhated and that sort of thing. My tier 1, Brooks, Wright, Lloyd, and Benson have some combo of, being explosive, dynamic, or potential 3-down upside, right? And that doesn't mean constantly 3-down workhorse all the time. It means they have a path to being competent enough on 3rd down that they're not a liability, right? Brooks and Wright, impressive pass pro, especially for their size. Competent receivers. Same thing can be said for Lloyd and Benson. So there's a path there. Tier 2, the blue tier, Irving, Corum, Estime, and Allen. I love Irving. I think he's going to be a productive player in his role. The question is what will that role be? I think the athleticism tells us that his path is narrower, and that a lot of that success is probably attributed to being in the Pac-12. But at the same time, I think he can definitely be productive. He's explosive plays all over his tape. He makes guys miss in ways that other people in the class can't. So even if you're not super fast, if you can catch a ball out in space and make guys miss, you're probably going to score fantasy points. As for the other guys, they seem to have a capped ceiling when it comes to what they can be. I think that's a narrower path. I think you're going to see more 1 to 2 down, non-high value touch rolls out of those guys. You're going to see lower ceilings. You're going to see short yardage goal line out of some of them. I struggle even with putting Braylon Allen in with that blue tier. I just know that there are folks who I respect in this space, and from what I hear about the NFL, that they regard Allen as belonging in that sort of top 8 backs. And so he's there just sort of as a concession to reality. Tier 3A, these are the guys I'm targeting when it comes to like the 3rd and 4th round. I want me Ray Davis. I want me Isaiah Davis. I want Kamani Vidal. At cost, I love those guys. Will Shipley, he's just so vanilla. He's just so meh. He's just so unimpressive as a runner, but he can run routes and he can catch passes. That's going to get him somewhere. That's going to get him a role. That's going to get us some PPR points. So I have him in there in that mix. All of these guys I would expect to go, the top of the tier you're talking about, there's a chance they could go in the late 2nd, right? All the way down to maybe, I don't know, early 5th, right? That's how wide a range there is on running backs these days. I don't think that day 3 running back is the death sentence it used to be, especially 4th and early 5th round, maybe up to mid 5th round. I think the data is going to catch up to that because the draft capital range is just shifting downward with the changes in the NFL and the changes in the position. Some of those are good changes and smart changes. Some of those are not. That's not really the purpose of this show, though. All right. Running back tiers 4 through 5, which is running backs 13 through 25. So tier 4A, the darker green there, it's some combination of these are underrated guys, small school guys that haven't, that don't always make it, when it comes to placing bets on small school guys, and or they have some form of receiving chops. Kyle's boy Watson, right now he's my running back 14, right? I know he's probably better, has a better all-around skill set than some guys I rank above him, especially like Braylon Allen. Like, it breaks my heart that Blake Watson is below Braylon Allen, but that's where I sprinkle in things like expected draft capital and that sort of thing, right? Like, you don't have to take, even if you love Blake Watson, you don't have to take him in the 2nd round of a rookie draft, and you probably still won't after the NFL draft. So you could get your favorite guy or your 2nd favorite guy or your 3rd favorite guy later than guys that you are kind of avoiding or not targeting. And for me, that's guys like, Braylon Allen. So, keep that in mind, that you're trying to find that value. You're trying to find, pound running back in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th round of your drafts. And these are guys that I would expect to be there. Tier 4B, Kendall Milton and Jace McClellan. They are what I call pedigreed but problematic, right? They're from SEC schools. They're sort of have some of the prototypical running back stuff that you look for. But there's been, of course, stuff along the way, injuries, especially for those two, inconsistency, fighting on crowded depth charts. Some people really do like him. They say, Kendall Milton's figured things out and his athleticism was pleasantly surprising given the injuries. I still want the NFL to prove it to me. They offer, to me, little more than first and second down plotters, short yardage, maybe a couple like goal line touches. But hey, like I say all the time, we're all about to be wrong about a lot, right? And then we're going to go with tier 5A. These are guys that I think have PPR upside that could easily outperform guys at the bottom of tier 4. Frank Gore Jr., Michael Wiley out of Arizona, very good pass catcher, was an injury sub, I believe, for Jalen, right? At the Senior Bowl. Dijon Edwards, who is shared the backfield with Kendall Milton and at times looked like the better back. I want to take a note about Tyrone Tracy. He's gotten a lot of buzz lately. Like people are putting them in like their top 5 and 8 and 10 backs. And I get that, right? Like there's speed, there's pass catching chops, that sort of thing. For those of you who don't know much about him, my concerns are age and position switch, right? The coaches are like, no, you're going to be a running back. And he definitely succeeded there, right? But he's already like, I think a 6th-year player in college. And he's still running upright like a wide receiver. Right. Like, so I think that there's only so much you can do with that profile, right? Which means there's only so much that draft capital that he's going to get. Do I like him for jet sweeps or kick returns, which we're about to talk about in a little bit? Absolutely. But I don't know that I see the running back upside that some other folks see. Isaac Garendo, want to talk about him. He's another guy I want to pour a little cold water on. I get the tantalizing size speed combo. And if he gets a little bit of better draft capital than I expect, I might bump him up a little bit. But folks, this is a guy who, okay, you want to give him a break for not getting playing time behind Braylon Allen in Wisconsin, even though I don't really love Braylon Allen. Okay, fine. But you were also behind Chaz Malusi at Wisconsin, right? And by the way, when you transferred to Louisville and came out as a 5th-year player, I think, right? You were still splitting carries with Jawar Jordan, right? Who is not exactly, an elite prospect. And you were older than a lot of other people on the field, which brings me to guys playing faster and slower than they look. Yes, 40 times matter to a certain degree, especially when you plug them into other things like height-adjusted speed score, RAS, weight-adjusted speed score, etc. Right? And yes, there are arguments that game speed matters more than 40 speed. Absolutely. Look at a guy like Audric Estime. But the opposite is true for a guy like Garendo. So when you're playing slower than your speed is, what that tells me is that you're not processing fast. I'm going to credit guys like the former GM, last name Spielman, I forget, he's on the CBS stuff. Matt Waldman, especially, of course, talk about how the closer you are to the middle of the field, right, to that center quarterback axis, right, the more processing you have to do, right? So running back is a processing position. Yes, of course, like any athletic, exercise, there's sort of instinct and intuition involved. But a running back has to process blocking, defenders in the second level. What's the safety going to do? Right? That's a processing position. So if you're fast, but we never saw it on film, you're probably a slow processor. Whereas the opposite is true, I think, in Audric Estime, right? Where you have let's say we even believe your pro day 4.58, right? Let alone the 4.71. But you see him on tape, he's got plenty of game speed. Same game speed, by the way, tallied by PFF as Isaac Garendo. So yeah, Kyle checking in, talking about the ECR for Watson is running back 28. Yeah, people are sleeping on him for sure. Thanks for the compliment on how I'm breaking down the tiers. I'm doing my thing. It's like it's activating the former history teacher in me a little bit, but even as a teacher, I don't talk this much. So and no, it's not Chris Spielman. Chris is the linebacker, I think. I don't think this guy's first name is Chris, but it could be there could just be 2 Chris Spielmans. I don't know. It's a older dude. I think he was in the front office for the Vikings for a little bit. He's on the CBS NFL podcast stuff, not the fantasy guys. All right. So let's then move to some of these, bottom end running backs. These are guys that are just names to watch. They're probably going to be in your rookie drafts 4th round at most. All the way down to like post draft waivers. You're looking at, I don't know, a lot of people like Mayan Williams as like a goal line back. Amani Bailey, I think, doesn't really have the athleticism, but it seems like there are NFL teams that like him, and he's getting some visits. Carson Steele, is big. Didn't get combine invite, just like Blake Watson. And, some folks like him as sort of a fullback or a goal line back. And tier 7, they're just pretty much long shots that have some traits to talk about. Like it's like one guy might have really good contact balance, another guy might have really good, footwork. Nobody's really got a mix of really good traits in that tier. About the combine snub, so to speak, for Watson and other people. Remember this, right? Sometimes in that second, third round of when NFL teams vote for who's going to come in the combine, I learned this year that some NFL teams will vote against or not vote, however it's done, for a guy because they don't want to put him on other teams' radars, right? So think about that when it comes to guys like Carson Steele, but especially Blake Watson. All right. And time to talk about wide receivers, right? So just like everybody else, I kind of have the first 3 in a tier, but as you can see there, I have them sort of gradiated from Marvin Harris to Neighbors to Odunze, from darker red to lighter red. I have high confidence in these players from an NFL and fantasy standpoint. They have, I think, the best floor ceiling combos, right? And I rank them in descending order by ceiling and or the number of ways they can win, right? So let's talk about Odunze at the bottom. He can be a solid X on the boundary. He does have good athleticism and is a little better at yak than probably a lot of people expect. But I think there's a narrower path for him. He's going to need a quarterback that, is really confident about throwing back shoulder stuff, can throw outside the numbers, that sort of thing. And so that starts to narrow his path to where if he's on the wrong team with a quarterback who can't do that, not that we're not going to draft him highly, but I think we may have to adjust our expectations, especially where we mix him in with the other wide receivers in startups or existing leagues and trades and that sort of thing. Tier 2 is Worthy. I've been spreading the Worthy propaganda, since day one. Kyle, has him ranked even higher. To me, he has huge ceiling. He's underrated. I think people are throwing him in with just the fast guys from the combine and that sort of thing. He can do quick twitch, short and intermediate. He can do catch behind the line of scrimmage. He can do jet sweeps and horizontal motions and that sort of thing. But the concerns about size and play strength are at least somewhat valid. Not to the extent that other people are talking about, but they're valid. So I need him to go to a team that I trust to use him right. If he goes, for example, to Miami, and I already think he's got higher ceiling than a guy like Odunze, like that's, my pants will be tight on draft night, right? But the beauty of all this is people are, maybe if he goes there, people will have mixed reactions. They'll think he's third and not think about Tyreek leaving soon, or they'll think Mike McDaniel and they'll get their pants tight too. But he's still probably going to go behind Rome Odunze. Like right now, you can get Worthy in some mocks. I'll take him 8 or 9, but other people in mocks will take him after that, 110 to like 202, right? So, if that sort of arrangement stays the same, like that's value, right? That's where, if I've got the pick that seems to be for a guy that I don't like as much, but other people like more, like a couple guys I'm gonna get to in a second, I'll trade back to where I can still get Worthy, a guy I like better, and pick up some other pieces and some value as well, which brings me to tier 3. This is where we start to get into where I mix in some of this like today's NFL analysis and to sort guys out. I have Lad McConkey 5. Yes, he has a lower ceiling. Yes, there are blemishes on his profile, but go read the article I have on goingfor2.com. When you take everything into account, when you consider all factors, all considerations considered, to me, I have pretty high confidence that he's going to be a PPR producer in the way that today's NFL is played, right? The other guys may have a higher ceiling, right? But I have lower confidence in them, and I seem to be a lot lower on BTJ, and we'll get to Mitchell in a second, than a lot of people are. Here's the thing about BTJ and, to a certain extent, Mitchell. These are guys who are on the outside, who are big, fast guys, who have, deep ball abilities and that sort of thing. And they also have question marks in their analytical profile about the limited production. Adonai Mitchell, especially when it comes to some of the peripherals, like I think it's either targets per out run and or yards per out run. And when you think about, rookies that we've been missing on lately, like where are the misses? The misses are on the Ragers, the Terrence Marshalls, the Treylon Burkses, the Kevin, the Josh Doxsons, the Kevin Whites, list. It's the big outside guys, right? Who are just, they're big and fast. Let's draft them. When there's a lot of limitations, I think Brian Thomas has more art and skill to his route running than Mitchell does. I think there's more of an upside for shorter and intermediate work that we've seen with Thomas. That's why I have him higher. I think when you look at his range of outcomes, a bigger portion of his range of outcomes is a wide receiver one on an NFL team. So therefore, I have him higher than Mitchell, who shares a lot of the same problems I have with BTJ. If those guys hit, it's gonna be great. But the question then becomes, where's the line between like, you chase ceiling, you swing for upside, you swing for ceiling, upside wins championships, right? Where is the balance between that and but at some point, you're betting on ceiling of a guy who pretty much has to be an outlier to hit it, right? And that's where I come with concerns. So let's see. Adonai Mitchell's yards per route run is the worst in the 2024 class, right? No first-round receiver has had a worse yards per route run profile than Adonai Mitchell will if he's drafted in the first round. I don't want to kill the kid for the diabetes stuff that's going around. Says he's cranky with his blood sugar. Listen, a lot of us are, even non-diabetics. Not that I'm belittling what it's like to be a diabetic. But come on, it's the NFL. They'll have somebody like pretty much taking care, like making sure he's on his body. Like it's like do I think you could flame out? Do I think there are some effort and attitude things? Yeah, I mean it seems that way, but who the hell? I don't know the kid, right? Who the hell am I? I'm mostly looking at things when it comes to NFL translation and fantasy production, and he's a high risk profile. I think Brian Thomas is a little lower risk. And so tier 4 is kind of like a repeat of tier 3, but just with the guys I like less. So Pearsall and Roman Wilson, wide receivers 8 and 9, at the top of that tier are guys that I have the higher confidence in, that perhaps have lower ceilings. But when we think about what's rewarded in today's NFL, I'll bet on those guys. Whereas Adonai Mitchell, especially, and maybe even Keon Coleman, might have a higher ceiling, but I have lower confidence in where they're going to fit in. Keon Coleman gets separation early in routes, but if you're not the first read and you let a defensive back catch up to you in the route like he does and doesn't maintain that separation, that's not good news. So go watch a Matt Harmon video about Keon Coleman talking about how he can be shifted into a big slot role and how big slot roles can work for guys like him and Jonathan Mingo and that sort of thing. So please go watch that video. He will elucidate it much better than I can here for you tonight. Ricky Pearsall, yes, there is some pink flags, some question marks. He's a fifth-year player, and the production was uneven. Obviously the athleticism that he puts into the testing, the hands and route running that you put on tape, he seems like a tough guy. All that goes into account, as does the fact that as much as I was like shouting from the rooftops that Richardson was the QB1 last year for rookie drafts, we know that his accuracy was inconsistent in college, less inconsistent than a lot of his detractors thought when you really look at it from play to play, but still not very accurate. Then he was playing before that with the Arizona State version of Jaden Daniels, which wasn't very good, although he had flashes, and then playing with Graham Mertz, the Wisconsin transfer after that. Those are things that I have to take into account when I'm thinking about what wide receivers am I going to bet on, particularly when once we get down to this next tier or two, there's even more question marks. So I'll roll the dice on Ricky Pearsall, in the second round of a rookie draft, if we, get the draft capital that we expect. All right. I love this next tier, tier 5 of wide receivers. It's my wide receiver 12 to 20, right? I call these guys the wild cards. The success or failure of these 9 wide receivers might at some point down the line really have a lot to say about what we ultimately think of the 2024 wide receiver class a few years into their careers. So let's look at Tier A. I have Tier A broken down, but not by how I like them. Just they're both in Tier A, but it's because they're different. Jermaine Burton and Javon Baker at the top of Tier 3A. I like them almost as much as guys like, I don't know, BTJ and Mitchell, right? And they're probably discount versions of them. There's just some question marks. With Burton, it's mainly off the field stuff, and he's going to slide down. NFL teams' draft boards will be off them altogether, so I can't really, in good conscience, put him up in that same tier with the other guys. And also, there's something to be said for some uneven production in a really in the last few years, where in Alabama's wide receiver room is really not that good, at least for Alabama standards, right? But then again, there's the argument that Jalen Milroe is not the best quarterback. But then again, there's the argument that he does throw a good deep ball, so that means it should be good for Burton, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Javon Baker was at Alabama and transferred down, so he had to transfer down out of the wide receiver room that I just said wasn't that good. Right. And there's some other stuff that we have question marks with him. I think he's sort of, definitely towards the lower end of this conversation. If we're taking like a bucket, no matter where my tiers are, and we make a bucket of big guys big-ish guys, at least on the outside, who have question marks, volatility, interesting, wide range of outcomes, and we think about BTJ, Mitchell, Burton, and Baker. That's the order I would have them in. Baker's at the bottom of that. Would I be surprised if he ends up at the top? No, I would not. But I think that's where we start to get into the conversation with these guys, that their range of outcomes is probably not an NFL wide receiver one, right? So the next part of Tier 3A is Malik Washington, Xavier Legette, and Malachi Corley. These are my big upside if used right. If not, it could be ugly. So to me, narrow path to success, but big upside if they hit. Legette is the guy I'm most afraid I'm wrong about, right? The fifth-year breakout coming out of nowhere, the very limited way in which he wins, I don't like, but there's obviously juicy athleticism. And if you put him in the NFL and he runs the 3 routes he can run very well, then you've got, 70% of DK Metcalf, right? And also, to his credit, right, when we think about this fifth-year breakout, this guy came in as a 190-pound quarterback in college. I think there was one transfer in there. Lost his parents, I believe, a motorcycle accident while he was in school. Definitely had, he admits, lack of focus, that he wasn't serious enough about football soon enough. And, when he gets Rattler in there and Juice Wells is injured, they lean on him, and he did what he did, right? To Josh Norris's credit, he pushed back against the Mingo vibes argument, which was an argument I was making before that. And he said, listen, Mingo never had a season that, in his 3 years or whatever in college, or 4 years, that in that 1 year that Legette had in his 5th year, and is not the athlete, that Legette is. So he's the guy I'm most afraid I'm wrong about. But if I like where he goes, because I'm afraid I'm wrong, he might be the guy that I push up sooner than somebody else. Corley, again, you love his physicality, you love his yak, you love that he turns into a running back with the ball. But when we talk about a narrow way to win in the NFL, he's got a narrow way to win in the NFL, right? Does scheming a guy touches mean we like that guy so much that we need to get him the ball? Absolutely. But, Matt Harmon, when he talks about Rondale Moore, talks about not doing real wide receiver things. Malachi Corley really doesn't do real wide receiver things. He doesn't really run routes well, or many of them. A lot of his targets were short or behind the line of scrimmage. I think his career ADOT was around 6, or at least was 6 in his final season. So he's going to have to go on offense that not only uses him right, but he's got to be somewhere in the pecking order where the scheme touches are going to turn into volume. It's great if you're the scheme touch guy and you're the yak god, but if you're, I don't know, the 3rd or 4th wide receiver on the team, that's not going to do much probably for us in fantasy. Tier 3B is mostly proven guys from Power 5 schools, but I think they're flawed. They have lower ceilings. I don't know what their place in their NFL team's pecking order is going to be. When I look at guys like McMillan, Cowing, Polk, and Devontae Walker, who all to some degree, there are things I like about them. There are definitely things about Walker, especially that I don't like. He's in that like big guy on the outside bucket, the risky, volatile profile. He seems to be only a situational deep threat. Anyway, those guys, some people love Polk. They swear by him. I watched Polk with somebody who watches film, together. And, so what I was seeing was corroborated. He is very just vanilla, and he's very rounded in his routes. And when McMillan came back from injury, he kind of disappeared. So, beware the Jalen Polk hive is what I'm saying. I could be wrong, but that's my take, right? But anyway, these are guys who I don't see being anything more than maybe a wide receiver 2 on their team, but more likely wide receiver 3s on their team. And they have narrower paths to winning. So tiers 4 to 6 are wide receivers 21 to 38. I could call any of these guys to some degree sleepers. I like the high upside in the right role for Aeneas Smith and Taj Washington. Aeneas Smith has an injury, major injury in his profile, and has an arrest for unauthorized possession of firearms, DWI, and and weed all at the same time, right? Who knows what NFL teams think about all that? When you add in the injury, and he's a converted running back, so he hasn't played the position much. Like I don't. But again, this is the kind of guy where you get him scheme touches. I think there could be some upside and some efficiency there. Taj Washington, undersized, kind of like a discount Jake Cowing, but he gets open. When you watch Caleb Williams play, he's got a lot of trust in Taj Washington. So, keep an eye out for him. Johnny Wilson, I will admit I was in the Johnny Wilson should be a tight end camp. And I think ultimately I kind of still am, because what he would provide there and the positional advantage would be so great. But as a wide receiver, if he does hit with that mold, and the people who point out his good flashes are right about him, then you're talking about Plaxico Burress, Brandon Marshall, right? Interesting. Keep your eye on. Ryan Flournoy, I just want to highlight him. He's a 5th or 6th year player, Southeastern Missouri, right? But when we talk about size and athleticism and hands, the type of guy that, a team's going to take a swing on late in the draft, he's worth keeping an eye on. Luke McCaffrey, the pedigree is going to get him a job somewhere. The tenacity and the strong hands are going to get him a role. I just don't know where he's going to be on an NFL team's depth chart. I think Joshua Cephas is another name to keep an eye on. There are some people who really like Jamari Thrash. I don't love him. I don't think he wins enough. And particularly, put it this way too. I think the biggest concern about him, no matter what you think about how he wins, is his hands. So there are some guys, and these are the types of guys, a lot of them, who, and when we get to this in a second here, are going to be in that special teams bucket and say, okay, it gets you on a roster. But I think there's even more to that this year. So let's look at these running backs and wide receivers and think about, does special teams get you on a roster and you can go from there? Absolutely. And we've seen guys do that. Is the ceiling low on that kind of path? Sometimes, but absolutely we've seen guys do that. But I think we should be a little careful this year, because there might be a small bump in draft capital for folks due to the hip drop tackle rule changing, but especially the kick return rule changing, right? Our guys going to get drafted a little higher in the NFL draft than they might otherwise, and us playing in fantasy leagues who mostly don't have return points, right? Should we be a little skeptical of that? When you look at the new kick return rules, when it comes to, people who are going to be successful as returners, they're going to have running back styles, right? Whether that's from being a running back or a wide receiver. So you keep your eye on some of the names that I have there, like Vidal Shipley, Rasheen Ali, who, if he didn't tear his biceps, we might be talking about him as a top 10 prospect in this class. Dylan Laube, a lot of people know about him and his return chops and his receiving chops. Blake Watson, Corey Schrader, Tyrone Tracy, Frank Gore, Isaac Garendo, Jawar Jordan, and Jaden Sheridan from Monmouth. Shout out New Jersey. On the wide receiver side, think about a guy like Xavier Worthy, although they probably won't risk him on those returns. We'll see. I don't know. Keon Coleman returned punts sometimes at Florida State. So I know this is a kick return conversation, but something to keep an eye on. Malik Washington, I didn't flag him when we were talking about the receivers before. I love the guy, but another fifth-year breakout. So you have to kind of like weigh the pluses and minuses. If he goes to a place and is used right and is high enough in the pecking order, he's super tough, running back build, wins at all three levels. I like Malik Washington. And again, getting back to this kick return stuff, Corley with the running back style, Aeneas Smith with the running back style, former running back, Jamari Thrash and the way that he moves. Jaquan Jackson, Isaiah Williams out of Illinois, Anthony Gould, Oregon State, super fast. Some people really like him, even as a wide receiver. And then, of course, Jaquan Burton. So keep an eye out for those guys as far as like, yes, guys who will make a team for special teams, but are they going to be drafted a half round higher because they could be kick returners? And we got to keep that in mind when we're thinking about where to put them in our rankings post-draft. All right, time for what everybody loves, the ends that are tight, right? Yes, it's a Bowers and everybody show, right? I mean, pretty much everybody knows about Bowers, elite prospect, with a tight end designation. Please make sure you read the article that I put on goingfor2.com with Brock Bowers, right? But again, I think the gap might be a little too big the way people are devaluing the tight ends after him, especially the first few. This is probably whereas the quarterbacks is like my most chalk rankings. These are my most like, I don't know, these could get really shuffled up because, NFL teams evaluate and use tight ends in very different ways. So who knows? Right now, I like Sinnott and Sanders in tier 2, Sinnott and Sanders in tier 2. I think, and when you're looking at a guy who wins or can play in certain ways, I'm not really comping him as he's good as these guys, but like, a guy like Laporta, kind of has the mold of Sinnott. He is a better blocker than Sanders, right? Maybe not quite the receiver. And I think that's probably going to get him, snaps on first and second down. That's going to get him snaps, in the red zone, and we want that. So he's my tight end too, but I acknowledge that Sanders is a very good as far as being a receiver and being that type of like slot tight end threat. We'll see how it works out. Tier 3, I have in tier 3A, that's Theo Johnson. I'm calling him big athleticism, like big oil or big pharma or tight end athletic industrial complex, right? He's the 9.99 RAS guy who didn't get used in college, but we all love, right? I think he's a little more limited as a receiver, even with some development than some other folks do. But I acknowledge that we really like athleticism in tight ends. It's predictive because like coming in, they have such uneven use in college that sort of broad look at athleticism and particularly speed kind of really does determine fantasy success. I like Jared Wiley a little more than some other folks do. He's not like the mover that a JT Sanders is. He does have some like, oh, that looks like a wide receiver on film. Played at Texas for 2 years before transferring to TCU. I like him as a sleeper. Kate Stover, I think, is also underrated. He's more of a two-way guy that's going to block even more than a guy like Wiley probably. But it's like he's kind of like a jack of all trades, master of none thing. He's going to be a little bit more developmental from the passing side. But again, give him credit because he came in as a linebacker and converted to tight end in an offense that doesn't use tight ends and had guys like whatever, like Marvin Harrison and JSN and Ibuka there, right? So, keep your eye out for Stover. The NFL probably likes him. Eric All, I think, is very underrated. Good receiver, good yards per route run numbers from what I remember. He, I think, has high upside relative to cost, as does Jaheim Bell. I don't love Jaheim Bell as much as some other people do. He's very athletic, but I think when you look at him being undersized and not being as good as Bowers, then, it's like, okay, people are like, oh, well, he's undersized, so is Bowers. Yeah, but when you're that small, you better be Brock Bowers, So because at that point he becomes sort of this positionless H-back type that may or may not really pan out. But again, the most important thing with these tight ends is not just draft capital, but like, are they going to be a top 2, maybe at worst 3 pass catcher on their team? Okay, then we like them. Does that team look like they have a plan? Then we like them. Do we trust the coaches to use them right? Then we like them. A couple other guys towards the bottom here to look out for: Dallin Holker and Tanner McLaughlin. They're sort of two-way tight ends with a little bit of fantasy upside. Holker doesn't have great athleticism, but he had big production in an offense that uses the tight ends a lot. But fun story about Holker. He went to Colorado State, and Colorado State had the staff found on the surveillance cameras or whatever that he was jumping the fence to go into the practice facility or something to have his track star wife feed him balls in the jugs machine so he could work on his hands and work on catching. So he wants it. A little older too, because he did one of those missions, during college. So, but I think there's going to be an NFL team that likes him and values him, and so he's a guy to look out for. Don't really want to talk too much about these other tight ends. Tight ends, I don't even know where am I at, like 11 through into the 20s maybe. Some of these guys, it's just like, okay, they exist. If I'm looking for names to pull out here, I think, when you watch Drake May, Bryson Nesbitt was a decent safety valve for him. AJ Barner is kind of like a discount Eric All from what I see. But again, I don't know the tight ends as well as I know other positions. Brant Queef has a lot of injuries in his background, but when healthy, was productive, and so he's a guy to keep an eye on. Dallas Hyder, a guy I like and respect, likes Trey Knox, so keep an eye out for him. Devin Culp has some skills. Washington ran a lot of 12 personnel, and they had those 3 NFL caliber wide receivers. So, I guess maybe his growth was stunted a little bit. He's kind of developmental, so keep your eye out for him. And again, when we talk about special teams, the tight ends are going to factor into this too, right? Can special teams get you on a roster and you go from there? Absolutely. But when we look at the new kickoff rules, the non-returners are going to be less of like, cornerbacks, like DBs and, maybe some linebackers and, some of the guys in the bottom of the depth chart at some other positions. And there's going to be tight ends more in there who can, block, because it's kind of like a running back thing with the kickoff play, right? So, will we get a small bump in draft capital for Sanat, Stover, Holker, McLaughlin, Barner, Spanford, Tip Ryman, who's a really good blocker and had good athleticism, although I don't think there's much fantasy stuff there, and maybe even some Theo Johnson as well. So, all right, overall Superflex, how am I approaching a Superflex rookie draft with these guys? So first of all, I know it's annoying for some people, but be water, seek value, right? That's the name of the game in these drafts. I think 101 to 107, which I have here, Williams, Harrison, Neighbors, May, Bowers, Daniels, Dunze. I think those 7 guys right now seem more or less locked into those first 7 slots in some order, with 103 to 107 being even more fluid than 101 to 103, so to speak. That's kind of a big meta tier, right? Like, that's a huge bucket of I want picks there. I'll be satisfied with just about anybody I get there. I do like some guys better than others, right? You want to trade back and forth within tier 2 for me, like Drake May, Bowers, Daniels, and Adunze, to see if you can get value. For me, it's prioritizing May and Bowers sometimes, and if I can hang back and get them later, then people want Daniels and Adunze. I could maybe go for that. But then, of course, there's going to be diversification that you're going to need to do if you have multiple leagues. So, you want to say, for example, like May and Bowers, I'm going to try to be at or above market on, right? Daniels and Adunze, as much as I really do like them, depending on where they go and stuff, those might be guys where I'm like, okay, they don't really present to me the value and impact that some other guys do, and I can get a discount with cheaper versions of them later, maybe, and so there may be going to be guys I prioritize less, but I'm going to be under market, which is what I'm saying, but that doesn't mean I'm going to have 0 of them, right? Like almost nobody's a full fade for me. I would, if you're at the worthy, if you want Worthy and Ladd like I do more than you want a guy like Ryan Thomas or A.D. Mitchell, or if you want Pearsall and Wilson more than you want those guys or Keon Coleman like me, you, as of now, don't have to take them ahead of those guys. So what I would do is trade back, end, I shouldn't say or, but end into 2025 to pick up value and pick Worthy, Ladd, Pearsall, and Wilson, closer to where they go, and let other people spend the higher capital on guys like Brian Thomas, Mitchell, and Coleman, with, of course, the caveat that I play in 40 leagues. I'm not going to have 0 shares of anybody, right? The second round running backs are pushing down good wide receivers at the moment. Now, again, the running backs are especially fluid. Draft capital landing spot's going to determine so much for those guys, right? But right now, if you're in rookie mocks, you're seeing people feel almost obligated to take, a Jonathan Brooks, a Benson, a Marshawn Lloyd, et cetera, in the second round. And what that's doing is pushing really good wide receivers into the third round, right? And, I don't know, like Burton's a third rounder. I'll take Burton in the third round. Okay, fine. I'll take him. If you want to take, Braylon Allen in the second round, you can have him. I'll take Jermaine Burton in the third round, right? This year it's funny because we usually say pound running back third and fourth round, but these wide receivers are getting pushed back, and 2, I wonder if people are going to overstate the death sentence for day 3 wide receivers, because when we look at the depth of guys who can be wide receiver 2s and 3s on NFL teams, right? Like, there may be a 4th round, an early 5th round, wide receiver, where in the past we might say, oof, day 3 wide receiver. We may need to be a little more interested in them than we usually are, but the perception might not be there. So again, some of this quality at wide receiver will fall. In the second round, I'm basically anything after the mid-second, you're just taking a shot on your guys, right? For the most part. In the second round, there are some guys I like at cost, but there are guys that I don't have to take there that I like later, like Burton, Baker, Blake Watson, Kamani Vidal, the guys I've been talking about, right? So keep that in mind as you're moving through your rookie drafts. Tiers 5 to 6, I have players 19 to 34 here, as you can see on the screen. Obviously, the running backs could change a lot. Like I said, the second round running backs are again pushing down these good wide receivers. Should you grab more thirds in 2024, right? Like, I know we say thirds are meaningless in the hit rate, blah, 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 blah. Is this the year to maybe tweak that a little bit? That maybe early to mid thirds are not the sort of throwaways that they usually are. It's something to keep in mind. And are there tight end values to be had? I think so. I think 3rd through 5th round and post-draft waivers, I think there are tight ends that are going to be very valuable. I shouldn't say very valuable, but have upside relative to cost. And so do you pick Bowers in the first round? Me, yes. I come from a guy like that is going to offer such positional advantage just because he has a TE next to his name, even though he's really a WR. And I really only play in tight end premium leagues. That kind of, that's the smart upside wins championships pick for me, right? It's why I was in on a guy like Kincaid. It's why I was drafting a lot of Laporta early second last year, right? Like you got to take, I think, swings when you're presented with a tight end like that. To be fair, the argument against doing that is that history shows that first round rookie draft tight ends often lose value pretty quickly. And you're better off just kind of buying them a little later after people are a little more disappointed in them. But let's say you miss out on Bowers. You're not really hot on Sanad or Sanders or whoever you have in that, 2 to 4 range. It's okay. Trade out, trade around, and maybe scoop up some tight end values, and think about that. Think about things that way. We'll see. Again, this is all hypothetical. We're all about to be very wrong in a little while about a lot of things. This is tier 7 and 8, players 35 through 61. Not too much to say about them. I think tier 7, You're looking at the 3rd to 5th rounds of rookie drafts, but still guys that I want and I like. Jalen McMillan, Ray Davis, Isaiah Davis, Kamani Vidal, Will Shipley to an extent, right? Rattler's probably going to get a good backup job or something like that, right? Tier 8 is the 3rd round all the way down to probably some of these guys are going to wind up being post-draft waivers because the NFL is going to poop on half of that draft board of a 5-round rookie mock that we love. But I do think there are guys to target, to look for, like Rasheen Ali, Jared Wiley, Blake Watson. We've talked about Dylan Johnson, another Kyle, my guy. I think he's very underrated. I think low ceiling. I think he's looking at, a minor part of a committee is probably his role in the NFL, but certainly also a very interesting injury away guy that I'm going to want to have some of if I'm building zero RB, especially. We talked about Tracy, Cody Schrader, is always playing above his head and is going to work. And NFL teams are going to like that. We talked about Taj Washington and Smith, so Eric All, etc. There are guys there who, if they get pretty decent draft capital, I'm going to be interested in the 4th, 5th rounds and stuff. And obviously, if they don't, then I won't be interested. The running backs are especially fluid when it comes to this, right? Like I, for example, have Ray Davis, Isaiah Davis, and Kamani Vidal. A good number of spots higher than I have Rasheen Ali and Blake Watson. But I could totally see coming out of the other end of the NFL draft, tweaking that a little bit, and the order seems different. All right. I do have players 62 to 79 here. Nobody really cares too much about these guys. These are pretty much guys who are, like I said before, sleepers at best. The guys I target in this range look to be Jordan Travis, Dallin Holker, Frank Gore, Luke McCaffrey, Joshua Cephas, Michael Wiley. Maybe I'll have a share or two of Garendo just in case I'm wrong. Jamari Thrash just in case I'm wrong. And, Bryson Nesbitt, again, as I said, a little safety valve for Drake May could be the same for an NFL quarterback. And that just about does it for the tiers. We technically did 5. We did 4 positions and Superflex. So that's a 5 for Dynasty Saturday Night 5. So that's kind of how I'm approaching things, how I'm seeing things before the draft. I think the argument of I don't care, I'll let the NFL draft tell me I don't have takes, I think is far too simplistic and not accurate nor helpful and fruitful. I think it's good to have, even if you don't have drafts before the NFL draft, which obviously if you do, this is more important. But I think it's you have to, I think, and I don't really like to speak in absolutes, but I think it's very wise to at least have guys in buckets, have some degree of guys you like more than the crowd seems to, guys you seem to like less than the crowd does. And then therefore, like you have a plan. If this guy gets day 2 capital, then I'm going to, going into the NFL draft. And so the adjustments then post-draft for you and me are small. And I might have time, I don't know, after the NFL draft to walk folks through what I did last year, where I took post NFL draft and knowing the draft capital set up, kind of buckets of this is how I rank them. This is how ADP looks. This is how much above or below ADP I am. And therefore I want to be over or under market. And then sort of like the target number of shares of them. And then like how many shares did I end up with and that sort of thing. If you have time to do something like that, I may not this year. Life is very messy at the moment if you've been listening. So we'll see. But anyway, that'll do it for the Tiers for Fears tonight on Dynasty Saturday Night 5. Please make sure you subscribe, rate, and review. Going for 2 live podcast feed audio. Please make sure here on the video platforms, you do all those other algorithm feeding things, liking, subscribing, commenting, following, no notificationsing and all that jazz. You can find me on Twitter at ffjunkie_. You can find me on articles and rankings on goingfor2.com. Midweek audio only podcast, Dynasty Fever with Jesse Schneeman of the DWZ platform. And I'm going to be joining them for some night 2 coverage of the draft. You can find that podcast at Dynasty Fever Pod. And again, Going for 2 has all the types of things you want on the website: DFS, redraft, dynasty, rookie, betting, etc. It's all there. We have a great Discord of really good people. I don't think I've ever had a negative interaction with a chucklehead in there. It's on and popping. It's going to have like 17 million, Scott Fishbowl mocks. So, join that. Go to goingfor2.com, and in the bottom right, there's a little purple thing for the Discord. It might even be in Jeff Lambert's Twitter bio as well. And again, need to plug draft coverage. We've got you coveraged nights 1 and 2 and day 3. Kyle, who was in the chat tonight, is going to be anchoring our day 3 coverage. And then I might pop on late in the afternoon there. And then Josh and I, the usual hosts of this show, are going to be on night 1, 8:30 to 10. But obviously tune in before and after. That's a wrap. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Even though I don't believe either of these, in honor of Josh, go Braves and go Irish.